Thank you so much. Good afternoon. I'm Vicki Arroyo at Georgetown Climate Center, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this side event co-sponsored by the Georgetown Climate Center and C2ES. In this session, we'll be focusing on bipartisan leadership in the U.S. and an important sector, in particular, transportation, although our state leaders are, of course, welcome to talk about their leadership in other sectors as well. I want to begin by acknowledging that in bringing a large delegation of state leaders to this COP and in previous COPs, we have been partnering for many years now with the Climate Registry and the Climate Action Reserve. So thank you to our partners. And while we've brought state and provincial leaders to COPs for many years, all the way since Copenhagen, and of course, the states have had a voice at other COPs before then as well, during the Bush era, for example, in Montreal. This year, it's especially significant because we have 11 states represented, and we've had 4 governors here this week as well. And as you'll hear from the states on this panel, the leadership that's being shown here is on a bipartisan basis. So I think that's important for the world to know since we're at an official UN FCCC side event venue. So we're very grateful this afternoon to have with us Governor Kate Brown of Oregon and Governor Jay Inslee of Washington State, 2 amazing leaders who are using their authority to meet the Paris goals, as you will hear momentarily. And to introduce them, I'd like to introduce my longtime colleague from C2ES, Elliot Diringer.
Thank you, Vicki. It's really a pleasure to be partnering with my old friend and colleague, Vicki Arroyo, and to help introduce this stellar array of state leaders. I've attended many, many COPs, more than I would care to acknowledge, and I'll have to say that this particular moment is somewhat reminiscent of an earlier stage when we had another climate skeptic in the White House who had just declared that the United States would not be joining the Kyoto Protocol. And at that point, you know, we and others began bringing states and companies to the COP to demonstrate to the world that before this phrase was even coined, that we are still in. And at the time, we viewed states as really the leading edge, helping to get the ball rolling, serving as policy laboratories, and laying the groundwork for what we hoped would be a comprehensive national approach. And, you know, in retrospect, the states are no longer just the leading edge. They have, in fact, proven to be the most durable and effective component of climate policy in the United States. As Washington has become more and then less active on climate policy, more and more states have continued to push ahead and to establish and deepen climate commitments and action, as well as forging links internationally. So while we still do await the day when more positive news will be emanating from Washington, we are extremely heartened and grateful to know that we can continue counting on state leadership to continue moving us in the right direction. At C2ES, and to tell you what that is, it's the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. We are grateful for one other thing. Each year, C2ES co-sponsors the Climate Leadership Conference to showcase and strengthen climate leadership in the United States, particularly among the so-called non-state actors. And for the past 7 years, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has also co-sponsored that event, but perhaps not surprisingly, this year they have stepped down from that role. So we are thrilled that, as Governor Brown announced yesterday, the Climate Alliance, a group of states, will be stepping in as the lead government supporter of that conference. So thank you, Governor Brown. The conference will be February 28th to March 2nd in Denver, and we're confident that with that kind of support, the conference will serve as an important stepping stone toward the Global Climate Action Summit in California and toward COP24 next year. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Governor Kate Brown. Kate Brown serves as Oregon's 38th governor, and she's committed to making Oregon a leader in meeting the challenge of climate change, to creating a seamless system of education, and to making sure everyone has access to the health care they want at a price they can afford. Governor Brown grew up in Minnesota and moved to Oregon to attend Lewis and Clark's Northwestern School of Law, where she received her law degree and certificate in environmental law. From 2009 to 2015, Governor Brown served as Oregon's Secretary of State, where she was a leader in increasing government transparency and accountability. And as governor, she's appointed a regional solutions team that is leading state and local officials to work with businesses to streamline projects around the state. Governor Brown.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much, and good afternoon. I am totally and completely jet-lagged, and I'm caffeinated on top of that, so my apologies if I talk too fast or I'm not making any sense this afternoon. Many of you know that Oregon has a very, very proud tradition of leading on environmental stewardship. And that's because that we know that the challenge of meeting climate change and growing our economy are not mutually exclusive goals. Rather, they are both moral imperatives. And I know firsthand from what we're seeing in our forests, what we're seeing in our oceans, what we're seeing in Eastern Oregon with our varying snowfalls, that climate change is going to impact every single one of us. And it knows no jurisdictional boundaries. And for me, my major concern is it's going to hit our struggling communities the hardest. Our low-income communities, our communities of color, our rural communities that are already struggling. It will adversely impact them, and it will increase already existing economic disparities. For Oregon, we've set some very, very ambitious goals, and even more ambitious than the Paris agreements, reducing emissions at least 75% below 1990 levels by 2050. So we still have a lot of work to do, but I'm certainly pleased with the progress we are making so far. One of the first bills I signed into law as governor in 2015 was our low carbon fuels standard, and we were able to memorialize the low carbon fuels standard into our transportation package that we just passed this last legislative session. The good news is that we got support from Democrats and Republicans across the state and across the aisle to pass the transportation package. For me, what was really great about our transportation package was a couple of pieces. Number one, electric vehicle rebates for low-income families in Oregon. And the second piece was, for the first time ever in our state's history, a statewide investment in public transit. I truly believe that public transit is a vehicle to lift our families out of poverty by ensuring access to educational opportunities and job training opportunities. So I was really pleased about our bipartisan efforts on our transportation package. In addition, we invested in safe routes to schools so children can walk to school safely, and bicycle pathways. Portland, the city of Portland's well known for our avid bicycle riders, but we want to make sure that our investments in riding infrastructure are blessed throughout the entire state. In addition, one of my first tasks as governor was to sign into law Oregon's Coal to Clean. And it's the first law of its kind in the country, intentionally moving Oregon away from coal-generated electricity. It also will double the amount of clean, renewable energy to 50% by 2040. We were very pleased to also close down, we're going to be closing down early the Boardman plant, which is our only coal-generated electrical plant by 2020, and it's going to be shut down 20 years earlier than planned. So that was a substantial victory. And then before I came to Bonn, I signed 2 executive orders. And a lot of the times as executives, we prefer to work with our legislatures to pass laws. But if we can't get bills passed into law, we also use our executive tools. And President Obama did a very good job at that, and I'm certainly taking advantage of opportunities. The one executive order I signed increases the number of EV vehicles. The goal is to increase the number of EV vehicles to 50,000 by 2020. Right now, we have only 16,000 EV vehicles on the road. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I know that working with our private sector partners, as well as working around the state, we'll be able to make that happen. And then the other executive order I signed addressed, sorry, I'm like caffeine, jet lag, energy use in our buildings. And in Oregon, our buildings consume about 30% of our energy use. And so the executive order is focused on moving state buildings to carbon neutral by 2020 and commercial and residential to zero net ready by 2023. So we do have a very small population in Oregon. We're a mere 4 million, but we like to think we're mighty in terms of leadership across the country. And I want to continue fighting for our underserved communities and finding innovative solutions to preserve our natural resources, reduce carbon, and prepare Oregon for the clean energy economy of the future. And I have to say, the other thing that's been key for Oregon is collaborating with our sister states. California, you might have heard of the other Governor Brown, Jerry Brown, and Washington. The good governor, Jay Inslee, is here, and he's going to be following me. And of course, we're also partnering with British Columbia. So it's been a state and provincial collaboration called the PCC, the Pacific Coast Collaborative. And what I like about the PCC is that GSDs get stuff done. And our combined impact, we are the 5th largest world's economy. We represent 55 million people, and we have a combined GDP of 3 trillion. So that's absolutely significant. But we facilitate collaboration on issues that cross borders and other jurisdictional boundaries, such as grid integration, a comprehensive EV charging network, and ocean acidification. The states of Oregon, Washington, and California have over 5,000 charging stations, and we want to grow those plug-ins. And British Columbia has 1,300. According to analysis of the PCC, the clean economy growth rate in the PCC was more than 2 times as fast as the region's overall job growth. And as of 2014, the region includes over 570,000 clean energy jobs, which is an increase of 91% since 2010. Proof alone that we can grow the economy while tackling global climate change. So I look forward to working with you. I'm so pleased to see so many of you here. As I said earlier in the conference, I totally believe in the power of we, that all of us working together can tackle global climate change and have a greater impact than each of us working alone. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Governor Brown. It's now my pleasure to introduce Governor Jay Inslee. Governor Inslee is a 5th-generation Washingtonian who grew up in the Seattle area. He graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in economics before earning his law degree at Willamette University. Governor Inslee first entered government to represent the 14th Legislative District in the State House of Representatives. He continued serving communities in Washington after being elected to Congress in 1992, serving until 2012. During his time in Congress, he became known as a forward-thinking leader, especially on issues of clean energy and the environment. As governor, Jay has his top priority is growing Washington's innovative industries such as clean energy, IT, and life sciences, and strengthening existing industries such as aerospace, agriculture, maritime, and military. Since 2013, Washington has experienced a 7-year low in unemployment rates, record exports, and notable growth in Washington's key industries. Governor Inslee.
Good to see you. Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to start with an allusion to one of my favorite movie Zero Mostel, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, if you remember that old movie back in the 60s. A funny thing happened on the way to Bonn. The President of the United States decided to go AWOL on climate change, and guess what? Nobody followed him. China didn't follow him. Syria didn't follow him. Not even his tweet fans, Russia, followed him. Nobody followed. He couldn't get a dog to follow him around on this subject, and it's a good thing, because we know we have to emerge victorious. There is no substitute for victory against climate change, because without victory, there is no survival. And we all in this tent are committed to doing that. And I am very appreciative of your individual efforts in this regard. And I want to get something off my chest. I was just in a radio interview with NPR, and the interviewer was doing his job, which is, provoke a little bit. And he was talking about how, it's impossible to win this. It's just too tough. We got all this coal and oil we depend on right now. We got all these technological challenges, and, maybe we should just give up. And I got to tell you, that attitude really bugs me. It's guaranteed lack of survival for civilization as we know it, but it's also an attitude just kind of for losing. And I don't think humans should be losers. I believe that the fact that this is tough actually means we should get to it faster rather than later. The fact that it's tough ought to make us more dedicated to it. And also, I think about every big transformative movement in human history has always looked pretty tough. When Rosa Parks decided to sit down on the bus, it was going to be pretty tough to change the segregation laws in the United States. But she sat down and wasn't moved, and look what happened. And I think it's important sometimes to tell each other what kind of time we're in. Some people have told me it's impossible to solve this problem. And I'm reminded of when Winston Churchill, during the Blitz in London, he would walk through the streets during the height of the London Blitz, and the fires were burning out of control, and he had a guy walk up to him one time, and he did that to inspire his fellow Brits. A guy walked up to him and said, "Prime Minister, these are such dark days." And he looked at him and said, no, these are not dark days. These are great days. And even if the British Empire lasted 1,000 years, these would be known as our finest hours. I believe that these are our finest hours, because they're the most significant time where people all across the planet, from every continent, from every walk of life, have banded together to do something for their grandkids. These are our finest hours, because this is a tough challenge, but it is one that we are capable of succeeding in. So I got to tell you, I learned from our fellow leaders. I've learned from Kate Brown, who's a fantastic governor. Some of their policies in Oregon are just fantastic. Their clean fuel standard is a really significant policy. Their coal policy is a great policy under her leadership. But as much as policies, I think we got to buck each other up in these instances and go home and share news when we go home, which is that the world is together on this. Now, here's the fundamental message why I've come to Bonn. I've come to Bonn to join with my fellow governors with a simple message. And here's the simple message. Donald Trump cannot stop us. He cannot stop us. He cannot stop us. He cannot stop us from putting a cap, like I've done in my state by executive order. I've put a cap on the major polluters. They're now required by law to reduce their carbon pollution. He can't stop us from having an incentive program to help people buy electric cars and solar panels. He can't stop us from having a renewable portfolio standard that already has produced 77 or 80% of our entire electrical grid is coming from clean energy. That's a pretty good statement today, with more to do. So the fact of the matter is that because we have states like mine, like Oregon, like California, that fundamentally understand that we can grow our economy through clean energy jobs, because we've demonstrated this, my GDP growth in my state is twice the national average, twice. Solar industry jobs are growing 17 times faster than the rest of the United States economy. we can tell the other states and the rest of the world that if you want to grow your economy, get on the clean energy, electrical-driven transportation system, because that's how to grow your jobs. So I'm inspired having come in here in Bond. I'm more confident than when I made that trip. I'm more inspired by the people I've worked with, and I hope you are too. And I hope you go home and you tell them from the state of Washington, Donald Trump can't stop us. Let's get on with whipping climate change. It's the destiny of our peoples. Good luck.
Thank you, Governor Inslee. Please join me in another round of applause for our two governors, Kate Brown and Jay Inslee. And I'm going to hand things back over to my friend Vicki now to introduce the next speakers and lead the round of discussion. Thank you.
So thank you again to Governor Brown and to Governor Inslee. Having worked for a governor myself many years ago in my home state of Louisiana, I can tell you it's so impressive to me to see governors take time out from their very difficult day jobs dealing with all kinds of issues at home and come even to a place as nice as Bonn or even to a place as nice as Paris, because it's not always easy to get that time away and to not take hits from the media for being in these international conversations as opposed to being at home and tending to all the other important work. So I appreciate the sacrifice that they make in coming to the COPs. It's so important to hold up the flag. Governor Inslee likes to call the states and local governments not subnationals but supranationals, and I have to say in serving them I certainly feel that way. And I'm really delighted to introduce this panel of national people who I've had the pleasure to know over the years. And I am, despite them, going to give you a little bit of background before they get started, because each of them is impressive in their own right. And now, after many days of people hearing from the governors who are impressive in their own right, I'm really delighted to give a little bit more of the spotlight to some of the other states on a bipartisan basis who have joined us here. So right here with me is Ben Grumbles, who was appointed by Maryland's Governor Hogan in 2015 to head the Maryland Department of the Environment. So for those of you who are not from the U.S., it's probably important to acknowledge that Governor Hogan is a Republican. And Ben came to this department from the U.S. Water Alliance, where he was the president. So that's a bipartisan alliance at the state level on water issues. And he previously served as the U.S. EPA's Assistant Administrator for Water in the Bush administration, I believe, and as director of Arizona's Department of Environmental Quality. And I have to give a shout out because he got his JD degree, his law degree, from my undergraduate alma mater, Emory. So welcome, Ben. Next, we will hear from my guests, because we're going to do this in the order, because that's just easier for me to remember. So next we're going to hear from Taryn Finnessey, who's the Senior Climate Change Specialist in Colorado's Department of Natural Resources, where she works on climate change and natural hazard risk mitigation for the state of Colorado. She coordinates Colorado's climate change efforts across state agencies, and she manages the state drought mitigation and response planning and implementation efforts. So welcome, Taryn. Next, we'll hear from Katie Theoharides, who is the Assistant Secretary of Climate Change in the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, where she works to implement Massachusetts Global Warming Solutions Act and otherwise serves Governor Baker's climate change agenda. And again, I should mention, for those of you not familiar, Governor Baker is a Republican in Massachusetts. And prior to working for Governor Baker, Katie ran her own consulting firm and worked for nonprofits on climate change and conservation issues. So welcome, Katie, and thanks for joining us. And last but not least, Snyder, the Deputy Commissioner of the Office of Air Resources, Climate Change and Energy for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, where he oversees the department's work on clean air and climate, including the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which we'll hear about today, I hope. Before joining this department, he worked on clean air litigation in the New York Attorney General's office. So thank you all for being here. And I'd like to start out by giving each speaker a chance to talk about what's happening within your own state and across states, and especially, if you don't mind, going off this theme of bipartisanship. So as you talk about some of the collaborations outside what you're doing within your state, if you could tell me what animates those bipartisan conversations and how those are going across the various sectors. So I'll start with Secretary Grumbles, please.
Thanks, Vicki, and it's a real honor to be here, and it's great to see a lot of folks out there. I can tell you that as a representative of the state of Maryland, it's a real point of pride to be here to underscore as strongly as possible that states are united in fighting climate change. We're still in, and we're going to work in a bipartisan fashion to get the job done. As someone once said, water boils at its boiling point, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. And for us in Maryland and Governor Larry Hogan, it's all about leadership on what really matters to the citizens and to plan for the future. We are surrounded by water. We have 3,100 miles of shoreline. And we also are a state that is committed to transitioning to cleaner energy. So one very important component to Maryland is that we have a statutory goal, a requirement that is substantially stronger than the Paris Climate Accord. Our state fully supports that. And in a bipartisan fashion, we got a legislature to approve of a 40 by 30 goal with built-in mechanisms to ensure that we're adding jobs and improving the economy along the way. We also are a state that has a totally bipartisan and diverse 26-member state climate change commission that is focused on finding common ground for the common good. I'm fortunate to be chairing the commission. It's an independent commission, and we make recommendations to the governor and to the legislature on mitigation of greenhouse gases and adaptation, or as somebody once said, avoiding the unmanageable and managing the unavoidable. And we also are very proud members, along with Vermont and Massachusetts and New York and the other states that are part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. Think regionally, act locally, work together. And so as my colleagues are going to talk more about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, that is one of the best messages that states in America can be sending, that we have a cap-and-trade program that is working and is supported and is being strengthened and renewed. And just the very last point is, our state is absolutely looking for innovations in environmental leadership. The governor has made it very clear by signing legislation to ban fracking in the state, by also having a very strong position against offshore drilling, that we're focused on clean and renewable energy choices and transportation choices. And where we can find win-win situations, that's a great thing. So later this week, we'll be announcing criteria for pollinator-friendly solar sites. And we're just proud to be part of this great delegation. So thanks to the Georgetown Climate Center, TCR, the Climate Action Registry, and others at Reserve that are helping us to be here and to learn from all of you. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So Taryn, I think the mic will be on. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in Governor Hickenlooper's state of Colorado?
Yes, thank you. Ooh, it is on. First of all, thank you all for having us here today. As Ben said, it's a great honor to be here and represent the states of Colorado in Bonn and talk about some of the actions that we are taking. I was reminded as Governor Inslee was speaking of a quote that we live by in our department, and that's, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And we literally have it up on our walls. And so I think that when dealing with something as big as climate change, that's fitting. It always seems impossible until it's done. And we like to say that climate change impacts all facets of our economy. And it threatens the Colorado way of life and the Colorado brand. So we're committed to addressing climate change so that we continue to preserve our quality of life, to improve our air quality, and to make sure that future generations have the same opportunities that we do. So we're doing that in a number of different ways. Our governor is very focused on bipartisan efforts. He has initiated and worked with 9 other governors in the interior western U.S. to make a commitment to rapidly expanding our EV corridors. So 9 western states have committed to using some settlement money that we have available, as well as state resources, to expand our EV charging stations. So you'll be able to go from Mexico to Canada, Colorado, through to the Pacific coast with an electric vehicle, reducing some of that range anxiety that exists, while also leveraging some funds available through the private sector. This is important in Colorado because we're a geographically large state. We're also a deeply, deeply purple state. And transportation is one of our largest sources of greenhouse gas. When we can tackle this and work together collaboratively to do it, then we consider that a success. We were also the first state in the nation to regulate methane emissions from oil and gas development. We did this collaboratively in a bipartisan manner, and we have seen not only has it reduced emissions year after year, the cost of implementing the rules have come down year after year, and we're now working with our local governments to support their goals. We have a number of local governments who have committed to 100% renewable and have actually achieved 100% renewable. So we're working to help those local governments that have had success and those that want to continue to have success build capacity, work collaboratively across party lines to implement that. We recognize that for Colorado as a state to achieve our own emission reduction goals, we need the local governments to achieve theirs and vice versa. And so we're committed to working with those local communities to make that happen on the ground. And there was something else I was going to say, but now it's escaping me, so I'll hand it over.
Well, we'll come back to you. Thank you, Taryn. And thanks for all that you're doing in Colorado with your neighbors. So Katie from Massachusetts. Massachusetts has been very active this year. We've been spending a lot of time talking to each other. Can you tell us what Governor Baker and Massachusetts are up to in RGGI, TCI, and other initiatives, as well as in your own state's compliance with your Global Warming Solutions Act?
Yes, thank you. And thank you to Georgetown Climate Center and C2ES for hosting this panel, for giving us the opportunity, along with the Climate Registry and the Climate Action Reserve, to come here. It's something that would have been very difficult for states to orchestrate on themselves, and I think one of the most important things for all of us across the board working on this issue is to have the opportunity to come together and build optimism. I think it's an issue that can be very, very challenging to work on day in and day out without the chance to share ideas with colleagues, to come together across regions and across nations and to really work on this in a collaborative fashion. From the Massachusetts perspective, we've been working on climate change and environmental issues for a very long time. We consider ourselves a leader in this field and have a number of in-state projects we're working on, and then a number of really strong bipartisan collaborations, both regionally and across the country. We were one of the states that joined very early with the U.S. Climate Alliance, committing ourselves to the goals of the Paris Agreement, and we are very much still in on that. And I would note, as Vicki mentioned, we do have a Republican, my governor is Republican, and climate change for us is not something political, and we try to deal with it as something grounded in science, something that has solutions based in policy and innovation and building our economy, and something that we can work across the state on and with all of our partners on. So we do have some of the pieces we have in place in Massachusetts, our Global Warming Solutions Act that was signed into law in 2008. That requires us to ultimately reduce our emissions by 80% by 2050. So we've been working very aggressively on that. We have our first target comes up in 2020. It's a 25% reduction below 1990 levels, and we are, as of 2014, at 21% reduction. So well on track to meet that. We did promulgate 6 new regulations this summer in order to ensure that we met that. And another step we took towards that really was a very bipartisan effort was passing energy diversity legislation last summer. This legislation is the largest in the country offshore wind procurements and the largest overall renewable energy package that our state has ever seen. And so we are just in the process of going through those procurements now and are really excited by what we're seeing. In terms of some of the regional work we're doing, I think I'll let Jared speak mostly to RGGI. We have 3 RGGI states here today, so we could all talk about it. But another effort I wanted to mention on the transportation side is an announcement that came out yesterday from the Transportation Climate Initiative, which is a group of 11 states led by Vicki and folks at the Georgetown Climate Institute. But it's very much focused on building state leadership and state collaboration around these issues. And we in Massachusetts know what a thorny issue transportation is. We've done tremendous work in our power sector through RGGI, through other initiatives. We closed our last remaining coal power plant earlier this summer. But transportation is now 40% of our emissions. And it's a challenge. It's difficult. It's politically difficult. It's difficult because there's a lot of costs and new infrastructure involved, but it's something we absolutely need to do. And so 8 states, as part of this TCI effort, have signed on to a statement to work with the public and engage the public across the region on this issue. We've worked together as states on this for a number of years. With some of the best resources and studies and process together as states that we could have. But this new effort is really focused on letting the people speak to us about what solutions they need, what works across the diversity of communities in our region, and how each of the states can bring their state perspective to this regional collective effort. So my colleagues in New York and Maryland, both part of that statement, Vermont, who's here today as well. So we're just very pleased to be moving forward on that. I think the last piece I want to say, talk about for a moment, is on the flip side of the challenge on adapting to climate change, which is something a lot of our communities are already dealing with. We have many coastal communities, many communities that are built in floodplains, have significant challenges with some of the hurricanes we've had in the recent past. And so we have been deploying a partnership program between state and local government, working to help communities plan for the challenges of climate change, help them find funding streams to implement their key priorities, and then helping them incorporating climate change into their day-to-day planning that municipalities do. So we have 351 communities in Massachusetts. We don't want them to all come up with a climate action plan. What we want them to do is to begin to incorporate climate planning into their day-to-day. So that's where I'll stop for now. I'll turn it over to Jared.
That's great. And now Jared from New York, please.
That's on. Okay. So one common theme I think you're seeing here is really the power of partnerships, the power of working together. Governor Brown said it very articulately we believe in the power of we, and that there's so much of the work that we do, the successes that we're having are coming from working together, whether it's working together across states, working together with our communities, as Katie just described in Massachusetts. We have a similar program in New York, the Climate Smart Communities program, where we have 210 communities representing 60% of the state's population outside of New York City have taken a pledge to address climate change, and we facilitate that. We provide advisors, we provide technical advice, we enable them to succeed in becoming more climate ready themselves, reducing their own emissions, and frankly achieving the economic benefits, the social benefits, the public health benefits that we see out of all these programs. One sport that I'm a fan of that very few Americans are is bicycle racing. And if you watch bicycle races like the Tour de France, it's always, the winner always comes out of that group that works together, the peloton. And there's really that power in numbers. And so we see that in programs like RGGI, like the Transportation and Climate Initiative. In RGGI, we have 9 states representing about 15% of the United States population, 5 Republican governors, 4 Democratic governors, have a program that has reduced emissions by 50% in about the last decade. And we're not holding pat there. We agreed just a few months ago to reduce the cap another 30% by 2030. So by 2030, our emissions across the Reggie region are going to be 65% below 2005 levels. You know, that just, and that this is just a power sector program, but I don't think there's very many other states, regions, nations that are achieving that level of progress in their power sector. And those gains are enabled by the programs that each of our states have underlying the RGGI program, that we all have clean energy programs. In New York, we have a clean energy standard requiring 50% renewable energy by 2030. We've increased solar power by 800%. We're committed to 2,400 megawatts of offshore wind by 2030. And programs like that, policies like that, done on our state levels, enable us to achieve that regional progress. And these programs are also creating tremendous other societal benefits. That we are creating thousands of jobs. In New York State, we have 146,000 clean energy jobs. Through the RGGI program, we are actually reducing energy bills. People think that you do a cap and trade program, it's going to raise electricity prices. Well, we're seeing the reverse. We have reduced energy bills. We have created $2 billion worth of gain in our regional economy through that program. And then enormous public health benefits from cleaning our power system. A independent analysis values those public benefits, the lives saved, the asthma attacks prevented, at $5.7 billion across the region. So that's a tremendous record of success. And now we've moved on to transportation. Can we replicate that record of success in the transportation sector by working together? What are the policies and programs that will get us that suite of benefits, economic benefits, public health benefits, the climate benefits? And I'd add on to that the societal benefits. Providing greater mobility to our communities, providing better choices for our low-income residents that often live in isolated rural communities and are stuck driving older vehicles. How can we provide them greater mobility choices, improve their lives, as we also fight climate change by reducing transportation emissions? And so that's why we're reaching out broadly to get input across all of our people, all of our stakeholders, to see what ideas they have to enable us to move forward sort of on that next phase of regional collaboration.
Thank you. So thank you all for that great opening. And we touched on a lot of themes that I'd love to come back to in another round before we open it up to broader questions. Katie specifically talked about adaptation to climate change. And actually, all the states, I think, alluded in their own way to coastlines or vulnerability, water supply. Boulder, of course, has had historic floods, even though they're not coastal. So I wonder if each of you could speak to some of the impacts that your states are already experiencing and how much that is driving your governor's leadership and the legislatures, in your case, leadership on these issues, starting with Ben.
One of the, for us, a major message is that adaptation isn't just about sea level rise. However, nuisance flooding in a state that has 3,100 miles of shoreline is a big deal. And we literally are trying to keep history above water and bringing together historic preservation, environmental, local government. That's a big part of it. Another big part of adaptation for us in the state of Maryland, because the Chesapeake Bay is the heart and soul of our economy and our way of life, is wetlands protection and restoration and green infrastructure. Using natural systems to manage water, to clean water, and do it in ways that reduce urban heat island effect, increase the beauty and value of neighborhoods, And the last point on that is that we're very proud of the fact that the governor has supported a new program called the Energy Water Infrastructure Program, where we are putting millions of dollars into wastewater treatment plants and drinking water treatment plants for the purpose of energy efficiency and energy conservation and renewables, basically reducing the cost of making the water clean. And it's a key component that came out of our Climate Change Commission, and it makes a lot of sense. It's adaptation and mitigation together.
Thank you so much. And from an inland state like Colorado that's experienced a lot of flooding as well as drought and fires, what is Colorado doing to try to address those issues directly? And how much is that influencing the governor's interest in being a member of the U.S. Climate Alliance and other initiatives?
Thank you. Yes, sea level rise is not an issue in landlocked Colorado yet. Would have to rise quite a bit. But flooding and drought and wildfire are our three largest threats. And we like to say, or I guess we have to say, we are a land of extremes. And prior to a couple years ago, it wasn't all that common to have floods and droughts and fires all happen in the same year. But in the last 5 years, we've seen that happen. We've seen the year start with historic drought and have historic wildfire and go to historic floods. And we've seen the havoc that wreaked on our local communities, on our economy, on our public health, on our air quality. Colorado, part of who we are is our natural resources. We like to be one with our environment. We like to interact with our environment. And so preserving that and preserving the Colorado way of life is a huge driver behind why we are so committed to driving down our emissions. It was a big part of why we had the first voter-approved renewable energy standard to drive down our utility sector emissions, and the governor is absolutely committed to resilience, so much so that after the 2013 floods, he created a resilience and recovery office that created a national or resilience framework that was the first in the nation and has won a number of awards that really it talks to what Katie was saying. It incorporates how to plan for a changing climate in your everyday planning process for local communities that this may be new to, or that they didn't have to deal with floods or droughts prior to that. And so I think adaptation in our state, which is a deeply divided, deeply purple state, adaptation is something that we have seen everybody get behind, and we've actually seen people come to the table with to support mitigation action because they saw how successful our adaptation efforts were, and because through our adaptation efforts they realized that climate change really does impact and affect every facet of our economy. And if we want to hold on to the Colorado way of life, be it agriculture or our forests, our recreational industry, our skiing, our fishing, or our economic activity in cities, we need to both adapt for what we cannot avoid and drive down our emissions to try to avoid what we can.
And so, Katie, I know that just because you're a coastal state doesn't mean that sea level rise is the only thing that Massachusetts cares about, but I do know that Boston has been a leader in developing a checklist for developers, that your new rehabilitation hospital has been built differently with sea level rise and storm surge in mind, your Deer Island treatment plant is. So can you speak about some of those changes that are already being made in the ground?
Yeah, so I think we've been really lucky in Massachusetts in that some of our cities and towns are really leading on the climate adaptation side. Boston has a Climate Ready Boston report out that goes through all of the impacts they expect to see and solutions to address them, and they've just been a tremendous partner to work with from the state side. I think in terms of the state level impacts, we are trying to bring a focus beyond just the coast. Many of our coastal communities have done a lot of the leading edge work on this stuff out of necessity. You know, they're seeing sunny day flooding. They're seeing severe coastal erosion. We also have things, I'm from pretty rural western Massachusetts, and during Hurricane Irene, we have a little town called Shelburne Falls where buildings actually were washing away into the Deerfield River with a storm that just sat there and rained and rained and rained. We're seeing a lot more volume in snowfall. The year that my governor took office, we had over 101 inches of snow that season, and just every storm had so much moisture content and was able to snow for so long. You don't often think of snow as being a climate change impact, but we're really seeing changes in some of the extremes we're getting. It's also hitting our agricultural communities hard. We're seeing things like last year, the peach blossoms came out too early. We had a cold snap afterwards, and that was the entire season of peaches. So I think the impacts are something that people are seeing across sectors. I would really echo Taryn's point in that we've been able to use adaptation as outreach on the mitigation side, seeing how communities are changing, seeing how positive adaptation can be for a community has helped get many people on board in terms of reducing our emissions. But something that we've done for the state side is last September, 2016, Governor Baker signed an executive order on climate change. And while it spoke to a lot of the mitigation challenges and continuing our commitment to emissions reduction, it also, for the state, for the first time, created a coordinated strategy on adaptation. And so now we have put climate coordinators in every sector of state government. So this is not just an energy and environmental issue, but we actually have co-leads from the Office of Public Safety and Security, Public Health, Housing and Economic Development, Administration and Finance, Education and Labor. So everyone across state government is working on climate change. All of our agencies have to assess their resiliency and vulnerability to climate change. And then we're developing a first-in-the-nation integrated state hazard mitigation plan and adaptation plan, so that climate change will be directly incorporated into an existing framework, which is something that's familiar to every state in the nation and to most of our cities and towns. And I'll stop, but our city and town program is our municipal vulnerability preparedness program is also modeled after that. We are trying to incorporate, as I mentioned earlier, climate change directly into local hazard mitigation plans, open space plans, master plans, et cetera.
So Jared, New York was ground zero for Sandy, and I think learned some hard lessons that way about how to rebuild differently with climate change in mind. Can you speak about New York and the measures that Governor Cuomo has put in since then?
Sure, but actually, I'd like to, while we're on the subject, you mentioned that before taking this job, I was at the Attorney General's office involved in litigation, and among the cases that we developed were climate change cases based on public nuisance, and at that time, this was just 10, 12 years ago, we were talking about the threats that were projected in the future, the threats that we were expecting to see from climate change. And we were talking about, things that we'd see 10, 20, 30, 40 years. We're now seeing those now. We have been seeing those for the last 5 years. Hurricane Irene that Katie referred to flooded our upstate regions. Unprecedented amount of rain caused flooding on all these waterways that have never had to carry that amount of water before. That was followed a year later by Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, which caused just unprecedented flooding in New York City. And as bad as that was, it's going to be getting worse because we now see that we're going to have up to 6 feet of sea level rise on top of, by the end of the century, on top of what we had at Hurricane Sandy. So that flooding, the storm surge, will now have 6 feet more to go with it. And so that requires a really unprecedented effort to make our coastal areas more resilient. We're focused on that. We work with our partner in New York City in developing strategies and implementing strategies in New York City. And New York City, frankly, is really the lead on that. We're also focused on the other coastal areas. We have a tremendous coastline on Long Island, both shores of Long Island that suffered unprecedented flooding with Hurricane Sandy. One of the focus areas there are use natural measures to reduce the flooding. So ways of sort of tidal wetlands, barrier islands, things like that we can rebuild after the flooding that provides protection to the inland areas. And then the areas where we're built up inland, it's building back in a more resilient fashion. So for the most part, we're elevating homes, things like that to make sure that when the next flood comes, and it is going to come, that we don't see the same level of damage. So in some areas, parts of Staten Island, for example, that retreat is being undertaken. So moving houses, actually abandoning areas that were flooded, repeatedly flooding, rebuilding further from the water, and then making those areas essentially barriers against flooding, the natural barriers, wetlands, which is what they originally were before they were built up. So a lot of work is going on in resilience. It's a huge challenge, and we don't have that much time to get ready for the next storms. And let me just say actually one more thing while we're on the subject. I'm sorry. That I think all of our states, have strategies to get ready for the next floods. That we're developing guidances, we're developing policies and programs. It was a real irony that we've talked a lot about the current administration backing away from the Paris pledges, the national administration. They also backed away from a resilience policy that was followed by 3 hurricanes. And so I think we're seeing at the national level, there's going to be an increasing recognition of the danger of climate change and the need to take action to protect against it.
No, that's a great point. And I think it's safe to say that, if anything, the announcement this summer out of the White House really increased ambition, as you've heard from many of these states and others who are not here in the room. But also, as you've also heard from this panel, and also from the governors that have joined us, the 4 governors over the last few days, often start with a message of the impacts that they're already seeing, and then pivot to a message of opportunity, and the fact that, as you heard from these governors here, their economies are doing quite well, thank you, even with a shift to a clean energy economy that they believe really is the economy of the future. And so before we open it to questions, I guess I'd like to ask each of you what drove you to join us here at the COP. I mean, Jared, you're a veteran. You've been to these climate talks before, so it's not like you haven't done this before. But especially this year, why did you say yes, and what do you get out of being here?
Okay. I mean, very simply, we want to present the message that there is action in the United States. There's a quote of Mark Twain that I've been looking for an opportunity to use, and it's the definition of patriotism. And his definition of patriotism is to support your country all the time, support your government when they deserve it. And on climate change, it is something where we see things differently than our government. We are still the United States, but we are 15 states out of the United States that are taking leadership. And there's many others that are not here, but 15 states that are part of the Climate Alliance, other states that are part of RGGI that are being leaders on climate change and showing the world that we are reducing emissions, we are tackling this issue. And what part of the thing that's really important about that, and this happened 10 years ago when we had another administration that wasn't taking action. State action flowered. That's when RGGI started, other initiatives, a lot of renewable energy standards. And so we developed new strategies, we developed new tools, we built momentum. And I think we're going to see the same thing happen now by the work that we're doing together. We're going to build that momentum for more action nationwide in the United States.
I think Governor Baker has been very clear on the fact before the U.S. pulled out of the Paris Agreement, and immediately thereafter that this is something that for Massachusetts is totally nonpartisan. It's something we're dealing with, and we really felt it was important to come and stand with other states and with all of you who have been working on this issue. I think not just to show our continued support and the fact that we want to pull our own weight on this, but to learn from all of you too. I think something for us and something that my governor always says is, well, you should be looking outside of Massachusetts. Where can you find the best solution to this problem? Where can you find the best partners to pull into this, and where can you learn? And I think the opportunity to form strong bonds with our sister states and with international partners, and then to really learn about some of the best practices on this stuff and innovative ideas that are being tried in other locations was really a compelling reason to come along.
So when our governor in July issued the executive order on clean energy and we joined the Climate Alliance, I think we intentionally waited to be the 14th state to join as an ode to our 14,000-foot mountains. I don't know if we did, but I'd like to think that. He said, we are joining the Climate Alliance because we believe that our voices together are stronger. And I think that's what Bonn and this week, the last 2 weeks, represents. We are coming together in a show of unity to say that not just the 15 states of the U.S., but all of us as a global community believe that this is an imperative issue that we need to tackle, and we need to find solutions. Our economies don't stop at the borders, so why should our efforts on climate change and on adaptation stop at the borders? And so I think our governor felt like it was really important for us to have a presence and to say that we are here in this battle together.
And Ben.
I was looking for an opportunity to wear a really tacky tie.
The state of Maryland
that
flag.
Beautiful flag. More than just to wave the flag of the state of Maryland. From the governor's perspective, it's really important to indicate that science, civility, risk management, and pollution prevention are values that are cherished in Maryland, in other states, and that united, we're in this fight, and we're in it to win and to learn. And so that's really why we wanted to be here to be part of this very important global event.
Thank you so much. And I should say Maryland, I don't think, is in the U.S. Climate Alliance, so it is beyond the 15 states, even in terms of our own delegation. And I know last year in Marrakesh, we released a report with 17 states that were showing the progress they were making on their clean energy goals, with or without the Clean Power Plan, which, sadly, as many of you know, if not all of you, is likely to be rolled back by the current administration. But, at the time, we were showing that 17 states strong were making progress towards those kind of goals. And I think, as I said earlier, in many of those states, the announcements this summer just will actually help to increase their ambition. And so with that, I want to open it to questions from the audience in case anyone has questions for this group. And it does look like there are microphones on either side. So I'd ask for you to come over and please say your name and your organization as you ask your question, please.
Hi, I'm Hannah Murdoch from REN21, the Renewable Energy Policy Network. We're based in Paris at UN Environment. And I'm coordinating the Renewables Global State of Support, so my questions are mainly targeted toward renewables. First, I think it's great that you're all working together and that you've already done so much. But I noticed that your comments were mainly focused on the power sector and in the transport sector, only on electric vehicles. So I have two follow-up questions. First of all, specifically, what are you doing to increase renewables in transport, whether it's biofuels or integrating EVs and renewables? And second, on heating and cooling, which also has a huge climate impact, maybe you also have a heating, what was it, the Transport Climate Initiative, maybe you have a similar initiative coming up on heating, and if you have any specific targets for increasing renewables in these two areas.
Those are good questions, and I'd say on the transportation piece, moving towards electric vehicles is very much a strategy of using more renewable energy to power transportation, because at the same time as we're building out electric vehicle infrastructure and supporting more and more electric vehicles on the road, we're making our grid more based on renewables. So in New York State, by 2030, when you plug in that car, it's going to be powered 50% by renewable energy. Now, we understand that there is a role for other fuels, particularly for other modes of transportation, and our work in those areas is more in the form of some incentive programs to look at and encourage development of sustainable biofuels. We're doing some analytical work to see how much we need to rely on sustainably produced biodiesel, for example. Is there a role for renewable natural gas in both transportation and in heating? So replacing some of the natural gas that we use with renewable natural gas from waste is another strategy that we're looking at. We have legislation that would require diversion of organic materials to digesters so that we are creating that renewable natural gas. It's an area where more work needs to be done, but we're starting to develop that path forward.
Anyone else?
I think one of the reasons we have focused so much on renewable energy deployment and have these new procurements in place is so that as we electrify the grid, we ensure that it's a clean grid, and we have that built in. I think we are very focused on EVs in terms of the transportation sector, and we will be looking a lot at deployment of infrastructure with the Volkswagen settlement, with other funding streams. But one of the reasons we have been holding listening sessions across the state on the transportation sector is because we feel like there are a variety of diverse solutions that we have to look at, everything from land use policy, zoning, smart growth, to the fuels mix and how we can get to cleaner fuels. So we are in no way committed to one solution on this, but really right now are exploring multiple options. I think the cleaning the power sector also speaks to the electrification side of the building sector as well, and that's an area we're very, very involved in, and is another trajectory on our emissions chart where things are sort of flatlining, and we really need to pick up the pace there as well.
So in Colorado, our alternative fuels program is called Alternative Fuels Colorado, and it's not limited just to EV. We have focused a lot on EV, but biodiesel is certainly has a fairly strong presence in Colorado and has for quite some time. And so we will continue to pursue opportunities that exist there. We do have an anaerobic biodigester in which the power generated is actually sold to California, but is produced from waste that comes from our agricultural sector out on our eastern plains. That has just gotten started, and it's not without its issues and challenges, but it's the largest biodigester in the U.S., I believe, if not the second. So it's a large scale operation, and we are working through some of those issues to get that back up and running and pursue those opportunities. We're also a state where we have 300 plus sunny days a year, and so solar has a huge opportunity within the state of Colorado, and we've rapidly expanded our distributed solar systems as well as our integrated solar systems to the grid, and we will continue to do that with the same idea that Katie and Jared have talked to. As we electrify our grid, then our EV cars can rely more upon that. So I think in Colorado, we tend to not believe that there's any silver bullet. We really look to an all-of-the-above approach, and we are taking that approach within Colorado. And we're also trying to seize the opportunities that exist. We've seen job growth in the clean tech industry grow at a rate 15% higher than the national average. We're seeing, wind technician become one of the fastest growing, highest demand jobs in the state of Colorado, and so I think we're trying to really seize those opportunities as we move forward.
We're just doing more than the other states. The only point is that through collaborations, regional collaborations, national collaborations, global ones, we all learn different strategies. Maryland is absolutely committed to clean and renewables. We have an aggressive RPS. There's a constant push to make it more aggressive, to balance affordability, reliability, but we know that's the move where we're going, and just as has been mentioned, there are some really innovative, important ways to turn waste into wealth, from poultry litter to waste. Our governor just issued an executive order on waste reduction and resource recovery, and trying to put in place sustainable materials management, both for the economy but for our environmental and climate related goals.
I think about 30 jurisdictions, 30 states and DC have renewable portfolio standards of some sort in the U.S., and we heard briefly from governors here, but all throughout the week, from states that do have biofuels policies, and of course California was here with their low carbon fuels policy, and we still have colleagues from California that are here. So, I think these are the kind of policies that tend to be more locally based because it's based on what kind of resources you have. So it's not just a question of diverse policy approaches, but it's really just a matter of like what kind of resources you have to draw from and tailoring it to a state approach that works for your state. We have folks from Vermont here, more rural agricultural state, as well as states that tend to be more urban. And so you're going to see that kind of diversity when you're talking about state policy approaches. Next question.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm a student in Rhode Island, and I've been working on the Energize Rhode Island carbon pricing bill for the past 3 years. So I wanted to hear your perspectives, mostly from Maryland, New York, and Massachusetts, about the prospects of passing carbon pricing in your state and whether it would be revenue neutral or revenue positive. And particularly interested in Massachusetts, one, because Rhode Island always follows what Massachusetts does, but actually more seriously, we have trigger language in our bill, which states that the bill wouldn't take effect until Massachusetts passes a bill with similar provisions. So I would love to hear your thoughts.
Governor Raimondo might take issue with that, though, I will have to say. Rhode Island likes to call itself a small state with big ideas, as opposed to Delaware.
I also like to say that. I'm an optimistic realist, I'd say, yeah.
I think on the carbon pricing solutions, we're really most interested in regional solutions, so we're less interested in a state carbon tax at this point in time, because we're such a tightly integrated region, it doesn't seem to make sense as something to do on our own to our taxpayers at this point. That said, we are considering a full range of market-based solutions already being in RGGI, looking at the transportation sector. So we are considering these options. We want to make sure what we're doing is fair across our state and to all of our citizens, and that we're coordinating with the region while in such a tightly integrated space.
I will say Maryland, the State Climate Change Commission, which I chair, has held several meetings with the discussion on carbon pricing or carbon tax, and I would say it's controversial, and our commission seeks consensus and common ground. So we have agreed to put it on our work plan for 2018 to have more discussions about it, to try to learn more about the specifics of it. But in the meantime, we're committed to making sure that we all succeed through RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, and the revenue stream that generates. And that will also help inform us in our decisions and the discussions we're going to have over the next several months, I'm sure, about the carbon pricing. And we want to learn more. There are some, as was stated, there's some areas where it is controversial and a need for more learning and researching what the impacts would be and how to decide the best way to move forward.
So just very briefly, we have similar legislation proposed in New York, and I don't want to get out ahead of Governor Cuomo on taking a position on whether that legislation makes sense or not. We do believe in the power of these partnerships, these regional programs. We're very integrated economies regionally, and it is very important that we move together. It's sort of the strength in numbers. So that's why we have so far emphasized things like RGGI and the Transportation and Climate Initiative.
Thank you.
Next question, please.
I am Kyle Herman, lecturer at Rutgers University and visiting scholar at the Grantham Climate Institute in London. And my question comes out of a little bit of a personal story because I got into the PhD program at Northeastern, and then the federal government pulled the funding, so I wasn't able to go there. Went to Rutgers, and that was fine. But and previously, I went to University of San Francisco, and we know that's one of the most expensive schools in the country. I had to pay full price, and now I'm looking for funding from National Science Foundation. I'm just seeing every day the funding's kind of disappearing, coupled with also a lot of the data on emissions is disappearing as well. And what I work in is policy-induced clean tech innovation, and one of the key variables is research and development. And as the U.S. still has some of the best universities in the world, I'm wondering how you're going to plug these gaps with the research and development funding. That's my question.
Well, that's a big question. And I can't speak for the U.S. government, that's for sure. But as somebody from an academic institution, I will say, I do think that there really is concern, not just about, potential funding cuts to science-based organizations, whether they be EPA or NSF or, other groups that work on other issues, health or other issues. But also something else you alluded to, which is the fact that some of the government websites are pulling down data that scientists like you and others depend on. It's very hard to replicate that. Our center, Georgetown Climate Center, has probably the most comprehensive adaptation clearinghouse that I'm aware of in the world, over 2,000 resources. And we worked very hard, as did many other academic institutions, to try to populate that website with resources from the federal government that might be taken down, some of which have been since taken down. But of course, big comprehensive databases are really hard to replicate as opposed to individual report PDFs and things like this. So I'm not really sure I have a good news story to share, but I do think that people have been vigilant, and other groups, including, I know folks from Tom Steyer's Next Gen organization are here. Other groups were hosting hackathons to try to save the data. I think all of us speaking across the aisle in a bipartisan way, and across institutions and sectors, including universities, but also the private sector, at the research enterprise and how important that is to keep up regardless of who's in office. I think that's just as important as ever, if not more.
Yeah,
Katie?
We're really rich in Massachusetts in terms of our academic institutions, and we rely on them heavily for research and development and policy innovations. We as a state have made a recent both monetary commitment and partnership commitment with the Northeast Climate Science Center in Massachusetts, which we're lucky enough to have sit in our state at the University of Massachusetts. And they have been providing us with all of our climate projections going forward. So we now, as a state, will have, for the first time, statewide climate projections through this center going out to the end of the century, which is just something we're really excited to be able to have. But part of that has been developing a climate clearinghouse website, which actually the state of New York piloted and developed, and we've been able to build off of that platform and to clear a lot of the resources that some of which are disappearing from federal websites. The other thing is the Climate Alliance is now adopting that framework as well, and we'll be using it both as a best practice place for states and as a place to hold a repository of all of those old documents that are disappearing. So that will be up on that site soon. But I think the other thing I'd look to, particularly given your question, is in Massachusetts at least, our clean energy innovation sector continues to grow really rapidly. It now makes up 2.5% of our economy, which is really significant. And so I think while some of the federal funding might be disappearing, there's a big role for private funding in this.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think what we're seeing in Colorado is the private sector coming to the table, both from the research and innovation side to the technology development side. We're hearing more foundations that haven't traditionally been interested in this issue stepping up to the table to try to fund more research and efforts on climate change because they feel like it is an imperative issue that they need to address. And I think that the folks that work on these issues within academia are just finding new and innovative ways to frame the discussion. And continue some really, really useful work. And so we're seeing that with the North Central Climate Science Center that's housed in Colorado. We're seeing it with some of our RISAs, the Regional Integrated Science Assessments. So I think we're going to continue to see academia, the private sector, and the states all collaborate to try to address these issues despite what's happening at the federal level.
So we recognize that innovation, research, development is key to this challenge. The challenge of climate change is really a challenge of scale, and to achieve the breakthroughs that we need to develop new technologies. We need to develop new business models that enable us to get renewable energy on the ground and other new technologies quickly and efficiently. And so in New York State, we have the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority that is focused largely on supporting research and development and innovation. We have a $5 billion clean energy fund that is focused to a large degree on supporting new business models, new technologies, has competitive processes where it gives awards based on competition for great new ideas, great new technologies, and so we see that as a critical part of whipping this challenge.
So I see our time is up. That went really quickly. Please join me in thanking this wonderful panel, and thank you all for joining us.